While online education is sort of in its infancy, it's ageless in its connections to the past. Today we are going to look at the history of the field, its connections, some of the key underpinnings that have incorporated itself into the field, as well as some controversy and some trends that are occurring at the moment. So let's start with history. In the beginning, when distance learning was a new idea, there were a couple of different ways that it was addressed. In the very beginning, and I mean prior to the 1900s, we did a lot with the written word. So we did a lot with correspondence education. There were things like mail-in education, where women would be given the opportunity to take courses through distance education by mailing. The instructor would mail the syllabus to them, and then they would mail the assignment back, which really gave them opportunity to better themselves educationally when they were bunkered down by some of the domestic requirements of their time. Following this sort of correspondence era, we have the radio and television era. And this really goes around the ages of 1920s to 1970s, where some of our education was done through the radio in terms of television and radio programs, and then through television series and even a tool that you could post and create videos that could be projected in public television. So there were quite a few different opportunities. They weren't real widespread, but they were opportunities for people to become educated using both the radio and the television. And again, that was from the 1920s to the 1970s approximately. Now, while there is a connection to online education with these two eras, it's really not quote online education. It's more distance education. So distance education sort of morphed into online education as we enter the quote online era. And that basically begins in the 80s and 90s. And the 80s and 90s were just peppered with innovation and expansion. And actually, we have a lot of innovation and expansion throughout this whole historical process here. But in the 80s, there were quite a few interesting things. Prior to the 80s getting rolling, we had a couple of things start to prickle up. For example, the University of Phoenix began in the mid to late 70s, and email and computer conferencing is actually sort of invented in the 70s. But once the 80s hit, quite a few things happened with education. The very first online undergraduate course is created in the 80s. It was about 1984 when this undergraduate course was created, and it was quickly followed in 1985 by a few very small graduate schools that would create sort of mini courses that were basically geared towards executives. So there were some dabblings in the online education and formal course aspect of things in the late 80s, or excuse me, the mid 80s. As we progress through the 80s, you start to see quite a few things prickle up. Now, most of this is done in a very secluded way. I mean, at this point now, in 2016, we are very interconnected worldwide. Well, that wasn't an option yet. So these courses are very different from what you might experience today. So as we get through those 80s, you see a few other things happening. For example, University of Phoenix fully expands itself to go completely online in 1986, and then in 1989 the first very large-scale online course is developed through the UK. And then as we get into the 90s, we see some huge expansion. Obviously, we get the World Wide Web. So in the 90s, the early 90s, we have opportunity that never had existed prior to this point in time. So in 1994, there is a full, completely online curriculum that is introduced by Cal Campus, and that's something that had not been done before. And there are a lot of opportunities such as this that are offered by having the World Wide Web as a resource, as a tool for hosting these online courses. In 1997, you see a couple of major things happen. For example, in California, there was this coalition of schools called the California Virtual Institute that actually offered more than 1,000 online courses. So there's some very large expansion there. We went from this little minor group of courses that are offered to just a few in a very specific area to a large group of courses, 1,000 courses offered across the state. And now, in addition to that, in 1997, we have the North Central accreditation of the first school. So the North Central accreditation is actually offered to Jones International University in 1999. Sadly, Jones International University closed in March of 2015 for a variety of reasons, but it was one of the first to begin to be accredited. Another major thing that happened in the late 90s was the Journal of Asynchronous Learning Networks. In the academic world, that's huge. It gave a solid place for research to be conducted and housed in order to show the opportunity and the research that is available in the field of online education. Now, when we get through the 80s and 90s, we begin to approach the new millennium and see a huge amount of growth and a focus on quality control. Now, this was a major thing in the new millennium. Quality control was kind of a major issue since we were sort of getting our feet wet with the idea of online education. Oftentimes, these for-profit groups, these for-profit colleges saw a lot of opportunity, and they saw options that could increase their profit margins by reducing, if having any overhead. So they saw the opportunity to make quite a bit of money, and therefore quality control started to become an issue. But in the beginning of the new millennium, we had a couple of really interesting things happen in the area of growth. In the 2000-2001 academic year, 90% of two-year colleges and 89% of four-year public institutions offered some form of distance education course, according to the National Center of Education Statistics. So there was quite a large amount of offerings available at that time. Imagine how we've progressed. We went from this small handful in the 70s and early 80s to 1,000 in the 80s and 90s to many, many courses available in the early 2000s. Another thing that was introduced in the early 2000s was the Open Courseware project, which was basically a free online resource that allowed people to access and deposit materials. It was created by MIT, and it became available to the public at that time. And at this time, in addition to the Open Courseware project, we also had 81% of colleges holding and housing at least one online class. So there was a large growth in that area as well. In 2007, we began to see the first ever MOOC, M-O-O-C, massively open online course. That was a huge thing. I remember when I heard the word for the first time, MOOC, and I thought, I gotta try this. This is fantastic. You can take a course offered by some major institutions for virtually free, if not free in many areas, and get a very high quality set of instruction from that group. So the first MOOC is developed in 2007, and that leads to some major change in a lot of areas. Now in 2009, you're going to see some big expansion as well. The number of students that are taking online courses had jumped over 180%. So it has expanded significantly, and some research says that at this point, actually this was as of 2014, we're up to 358% or 360% more than we had in the early 2000s. And even more than that, one of the major things that we saw when looking at the idea of quality control was that there was a shift in the ability to create and develop courses that were of high quality. Because the demand was so high and so many people were looking to get into this market, quality began to increase, and the federal government began to get involved. So there was some quality there too, federal and state. So we actually saw in 2014 a survey of CEOs and small business owners, and 3/4 of them said that they now saw, as of 2014, 2012 to 2014, they now saw the online education in equal to the face-to-face education. So this was something that was pretty big. And we saw a large move to international connections as well. Foreign students from outside of the United States began to see this as an opportunity. So there was a large influx of students that were outside of the US that desired to take these online courses, and so beefed up the amount of courses offered and the quality of those courses. Now, when we move to current, so somewhere between 2013 to now, we see a couple of additional things. Not only do the CEOs of small businesses and even major companies see the quality of the courses, but academic leaders do as well. 77% of academic leaders in 2015 rated online learning outcomes as the same, or in some cases even superior to those of the face-to-face instructions. And then as of 2014, 98% of public colleges and universities offered online programs. So again, huge growth, huge expansion, and again, a focus on quality control. Now, today, you can get, quote, educated in a number of ways, from a formal institution, through a MOOC that is available for free or close to free in many cases. You could even Google for a YouTube video on a subject that you're interested in, or listen to a podcast on a topic area of your interest. There are numerous ways to get educated, not necessarily all formal, but all ways of learning online. So the number of students that take these online courses is projected to even more so, quadruple in the future, to see a large shift in not only the quantity of courses, but also the quality. So this is something that historically kind of leads us to see some progression. Now, not only do we have progression in numbers and quantity, but we have changes in philosophy and theory that have happened throughout history. Now, I see philosophy and theory as very interconnected. I see often that theory can influence philosophy and philosophy can there mold theory. So there's quite a few things that impact each other, and they're so interconnected. And there are a couple of philosophies / theoretical perspectives that were really heavy on learning and then in subsequent impact online learning. One of those major ones from ages past is behaviorism. This was seen as something that was a very structured, very linear process where learning is seen through a change in observable behavior. So kind of influenced or developed by Thorndike, Pavlov, and Skinner, this was something that was seen as a philosophy of education or theory of education, of learning, that you would be rewarded and therefore learning would occur, or you would be punished and therefore learning would occur. So it was very much focused on observable behavior. Now, it should be noted that behaviorism, with its emphasis on rewards and punishment, really looks at measurable outcomes. So there was a lot of focus on standards and measurements and so on, which is something we are still looking at today. Now, after behaviorism, we're sort of in the midst of it. We see a new aspect of learning, a new idea, and that is constructivists. Constructivism is a little different from behaviorism, where it is not necessarily reward and punishment. Instead, it is the creation of knowledge, the building of knowledge. In many cases, you see people discussing constructivism in different ways. Some people talk about constructivism as the individual constructing their own knowledge, while others talk about constructivism in a social aspect. So there's a connection of social behavior creating the learning. So that's social constructivism, basically. And social constructivism looks at learning environments as opportunities for students to dialogue and connect and therefore create meaning. So online communities at first didn't really fit well with this philosophy because we had very, again, linear processes in the online realm. Whereas now you see a lot of opportunity for constructivist learning with some of the advanced tools that we have. But this didn't stop here. We didn't end with social constructivism or constructivism. We have also progressed to something that has been a new topic of discussion in the recent past, and that is connectivism. And connectivism is something that is very integrated. It is very much in some cases, an object of contention, but something that I think many are starting to approach as a potential theory slash philosophy of learning that could really impact online education. Now, connectivists see knowledge as something that is increasing really fast, that's happening very quickly. So it's really more about how you get the information than it is about the actual content being provided to you. So oftentimes connectivism sees the individual's personal knowledge as the starting point, and they can use that knowledge to mold or adjust or direct their learning. So they often connect those things, and this connectivism happens both internally with the person as well as in a social aspect. And they see connectivism as a way to sort of connect both content and knowledge with experience as well as with others. So connectivism, developed by Siemens and Downes, was something that was a major part, or is still a major part, of online education. Actually, Siemens, Downes, and Cormeyer introduced a MOOC called Connectivism and Connective Knowledge in 2011 that sought to explain how the connectivist approach works, as well as utilize the tools of online learning. So there was sort of a connection in the connectivism and the MOOC that was available. Now, there are some things that really impact connectivism, so you have to be careful with how you approach online learning with this perspective, but it is something that is sort of in contention and part of discussion right now. Now, these are three major philosophies or theoretical perspectives on learning and how they impact online education. Now, there are many, many other theories that also impact online education, and some more directly than others. A couple here, these three, are some that I feel are more prevalent in the research that I've done as opposed to others. However, like I said, there's numerous theories. Of these three, the first one addresses two variables. It is the theory of independent study created in 1994 by Michael Moore, and this looks at two parts. First part looks at the variables of learner autonomy and the distance between the teacher and the learner. So those two things impact the education in the online environment. And the second part of it asks or states that the student has to accept that high degree of responsibility. So again, the theory of independent study. They have to accept that because of the distance between the instructor and the student. And that distance is not only a physical distance, but a temporal distance as well. Another one that has been of use quite a bit is the community of inquiry. This is a model that really does impact the way we see the creation of courses, as well as the way we approach how we learn from the courses and how we monitor the courses. The community of inquiry looks at three major presences, and they also overlap to create kind of the whole idea. The three major presences are the teaching presence, social presence, and cognitive presence. So the teaching presence comes obviously from the instructor and how they are present in the course and how they create the course. The social presence is the community of the students, as well as the community of the instructor with the students and how the course is set up. And then the cognitive presence, which is very much the content and how it is perceived and approached. So that's the community of inquiry. And then finally, we have the online collaborative learning, which, although it was coined online collaborative learning in 2012, it sort of stems way back to the computer-mediated communication perspective, which is something I learned about ages ago in my communications courses. And so this I have sort of an affinity for. I feel a connection to this theory. But it basically is a model of learning in which students are encouraged to support each other and to work together to connect and create knowledge. I see this as very much connected to connectivism in its own way. But online collaborative learning really looks at community, and it looks at the connections of the students and the students with the instructor. This is something I find fascinating. Now, in addition to these theories, there are many, many others. As you can see, I'm throwing out a few here, which I couldn't possibly address in depth, but it is something that it's been connected to the idea of online learning or even distance learning throughout the 80s, 90s, and current day. So there are a number of theories. Just these past ones were the ones that I thought I had seen quite a bit of. Now, in addition to theory, we have some sociocultural underpinnings. So basically things that are making quite a big difference in the way we see online education and those that participate in it. Now, there are a number of things that we look at when we consider the idea of sociocultural underpinnings, and it starts really with its definition. How do we define online learning? And specifically, how do we define it from the perspective of culture? In many cases, the definition or the idea of online learning is really seen as an artifact. It's concrete. It's something that is solid, that we can look at, that we can manipulate. But if you think about online learning as an idea as opposed to an artifact, you can see quite a different perspective taking shape. Culture does influence online learning. It influences on the institutional level, it influences on the instructional level in content, and it influences those learners. I oftentimes think of the definition of online learning as something that is very malleable. It's fluid in a way. It changes based on the tools we have available, as well as some of the needs and desires of the current culture. Sometimes the need is quite different from year to year. So the definition, depending upon the culture, depending upon the social situation, will certainly change as we progress. Another thing that is a major sociocultural underpinning is the appeal of these courses. What is it that draws students in? Now, oftentimes we see nonverbal cues and physical closeness of ourselves to an instructor as a major plus in face-to-face education. And it is. Having that oral education can be very engaging. It can be easy to connect, and again, to get instant feedback from your instructor is huge. But what is it that appeals to the culture that we have now that maybe wouldn't be as appealing because it's not an opportunity in a face-to-face course? Well, oftentimes students, apart from the fact that they are connected to online learning because they enjoy the idea of being at home in their pajamas and doing homework, often students enjoy the opportunity to pause and think and to ask their questions with a little bit more thought, or to reflect on a video or a writing in more detail and to expand on that and have the opportunity to rewind to make sure they really got it. So even though that oral aspect is not the same, it's still there. It just can be rewound. So there's opportunities that we wouldn't have had in the situation that we have had in the past, where we only had the opportunity for either correspondence education or for a face-to-face situation. So appeal has been a huge impact. And obviously our culture is very comfortable with technology compared to 15, 20, 30 years ago. So the appeal is also in that as well. Next here we have current research. Current research is very lacking in the sociocultural aspect. We look a lot at some of the more concrete aspects of online learning. So again, back to the definition that I had earlier, we look at things like, are students satisfied with their courses? Are they able to log on? Do they have access to a computer? That kind of thing. Well, while those are all very important, research is sort of lacking when it comes to the cultural connections. So it is something that should, I hope, be addressed in the future. It is something that would be quite interesting to see how these sociocultural factors create the definition of your experience with online learning. Now, finally, we're going to look at our last couple of things, and that leaves us with a few opportunities here. We look at community. I actually did a presentation for my university, for my school, on community in an online course. Because unfortunately, we haven't quite gotten to the point where we see online as an idea, as a malleable thing. We see it as a tool. And so oftentimes community is missing. There is less discussion, and sometimes that discussion is of lower quality, but community is definitely a factor. It is something that is impacted by culture. So the way we communicate with each other, what tools we use when we communicate, as well as the opportunities that we have amongst each other to share our different perspectives is huge. Now, in a course like I might teach, interpersonal communication, it's very easy to incorporate culture and cultural perspective and to reduce ethnocentrism to a degree. However, it's not always possible, or at least not simple, to introduce that idea in other courses, say a math course, for example, because the information is very concrete as opposed to malleable. So in order to create this sense of community and to integrate culture, that is something that we have to consider when we look at it from the perspective of online education. Next is our opportunities. We have quite a few opportunities, not only with just some of the tools that we have and some of the mobility opportunities, such as having an iPad that you could take anywhere, or a laptop that you could take anywhere, or even be able to write, unfortunately, write papers on your phone. I do have many students that do that. So yes, there are technical opportunities, but there are also opportunities in other areas. For example, opportunities in the area of learning styles and learning ability, to be able to scaffold our students where it is needed and on an individual basis, to have this sort of integrated process that allows students to take the information, to take the instructional tools, and to use them in the way that is most effective for them, to give students opportunities in a number of different aspects, to not only have a video, but to have a video and transcripts, as well as a podcast that goes with it, so students can learn from a variety of methods. So there's opportunity here that we may not have had before. And again, there's opportunity for cultural connections that we have not had before. Not only are we connecting with people across state lines, but we're connecting with people across oceans on the other side of the world. And so there are opportunities for connections with these students, not only from the instructor's perspective, but from the student perspective, that we may not have had before. I mean, the internet even creates opportunity that you wouldn't have had with content. We have opportunity to read things we never thought we could read before. We have opportunity to see things, recordings of things that we never thought we would be able to capture. There are many opportunities. I personally feel like I have an opportunity to express my thoughts in the verbal format in a very different way than I would in a written format. So there's opportunity here because of the cultural progression that we've made. And in some cases, there's opportunity to address some of the issues that we have culturally, so especially in the terms of ethnocentrism. And finally, we have the future. So what do we have to look forward to? There are many things that we can look forward to. And for me personally, I'm really excited about the opportunity to reduce ethnocentristic perceptions and to create a society that can work together and connect and build community on a very large scale. But there are many things that we have to address first. Some of those are the controversies that are in the field of online education, the things that we aren't quite sure about, things that we still need to research, we still need to address, that are sort of in contention right now, as well as what we see as the potential trend or the potential future form of research. And those are the things that Seth will be addressing now. So hopefully this historical background and some of those sociocultural and theoretical underpinnings have led us to a direction that we will make good choices and find strong research to adhere and fix some of the controversies, as well as to address some of the trends and some of the future perspectives that we're getting ready to see. Thank you very much for listening.